Well, hello everyone and welcome to our final video on this topic, nutrition in humans. Since you guys like to always talk about the food that I eat and make fun of it, today I'm very proud to say that I've eaten some risotto, home-cooked risotto, and if you don't know what that is, go and look it up. But anyway, the last thing I need is to look at this picture of a very grossly sick man. And you see all these terrible disease symptoms and signs. You see all of these things, whether your eye is yellow or you have these spider-like blood vessels and fluid building up, all have to do with an organ in our digestive system, which is really important. You see, these are all signs of liver failure. And today we'll be looking at the liver. We're going to be looking at the roles of the liver, the functions, and also talking a bit about something very exciting, alcohol. Right, consuming alcohol. What happens when you drink too much of it? So then these are the pages that you'll be able to find information in your textbook. Alright, let's get started. So we'll be talking about these 5 different functions in the liver. Okay, I'm going to be going through them one by one. So just pause here for a while and have a look at the overview. Now we're going to be starting with fat digestion. The liver has a role in fat digestion. And we've already talked about this in our previous video. What does the liver produce that digests fat? It produces bile. And if you remember, what does bile do? Yes, bile emulsifies fat. It breaks down large fat droplets into smaller fat droplets to increase the surface area to volume ratio of the fat. Next, we're going to be looking at carbohydrate metabolism. Metabolism is a very big word, but really it just means chemical reactions. So the liver carries out many reactions that involve carbohydrates. So let's take a look at that. Now I want you to imagine that you've just had a very heavy meal, like maybe your Christmas dinner or like your reunion dinner at Chinese New Year. You've eaten all that starchy stuff, all the rice and the pizza. What will your blood glucose levels be like? Now they're likely to be very high, right? You've eaten all the starch and it's been broken down to maltose, been broken down to glucose, and the glucose has been absorbed into your blood, and now your blood has a very high level of glucose. And you're a bit like this Powerpuff Girl, ooh, very high. But it's not that good in the long run. It's not good for you to have such high blood glucose levels. And that's where the liver comes in. See, the liver helps to keep your blood glucose levels in check. The liver works together with the pancreas to regulate blood glucose concentration. Okay, here the word regulate means to keep the blood glucose concentration relatively constant. Right, so imagine I want to keep my blood glucose level at about this point, right? And let's say this point here. Now if my blood glucose, let's say at about 5 units, if my blood glucose level goes too high, about 10 units, the liver works to bring it back down again to 5. If the blood glucose level goes too low, like maybe about 2 units, then the liver works to bring the glucose level back up to 5. So the liver helps to regulate the blood glucose concentration. Now, when the blood glucose concentration is too high, what the liver does is that it converts the extra glucose into glycogen to be stored in the liver. So it takes all the glucose out from the blood and stores it as glycogen. But when the blood glucose level or concentration drops too low, right, about 2 units or something, then what the liver does is this: it takes the glycogen that is stored and it converts it back into glucose and releases the glucose into the blood, right? So that helps to restore and to bring back the glucose levels back to about 5, right? That's the level that the liver wants to keep the blood glucose at. Now just a bit more about that, and now we're going to look at how the liver works together with the pancreas to regulate blood glucose level. Now, what happens when the blood glucose levels are too high? Let's say you've eaten lots and lots of food. Here's what happens. Your pancreas secretes a hormone called insulin. Right? This is a hormone. And this hormone sends a signal to your liver and causes the liver to convert glucose into glycogen to be stored in the liver. Now that results in a decrease in the blood glucose level, right? The glucose is taken out of the blood and stored as glycogen in the liver. Now what happens when blood glucose levels are too low? For instance, if you've gone on a long fast or something, you haven't eaten for a while. But what your pancreas does is that it secretes a different hormone, this time a hormone called glucagon, right? Glucagon. Sounds a bit like glucose gone, right? Glucagon. Well, when glucose is gone, right, when there's too low of blood glucose, glucagon, the pancreas secretes glucagon, and glucagon stimulates the liver to convert the glycogen that is stored back into glucose. So glycogen is broken down into glucose and is released back into the bloodstream, causing an increase in the blood glucose level. So now blood glucose is brought up again so that you can restore the level of glucose in the blood. Otherwise, you'll be faint. Otherwise, the person will just feel very weak. Alright, so that's all for the carbohydrates. Now, what does the liver do for amino acids? Well, the liver also helps to break down excess amino acids, and we're going to look at what that looks like. Now, the key point here is that excess amino acids, extra amino acids, undergo deamination. Okay, this is a very important word. Deamination. Okay, not animation. That's like your cartoon. Ooh, this is deamin, like amino acids, deamination. Now, what happens is that, you remember your amino acids, right? They've got an amino group, they've got this side, and they've got this acid group. Now, the amino group here is actually removed and converted to urea. And this urea is later removed from your body through your urine. Okay, through your urine. Wee. Alright, so just a different way of showing it. In deamination, right, the amino group is removed, right? Deamination removes the amino group, and the amino group is converted into urea, which is removed in your urine, flushed down the toilet bowl. Now, there's also an acid group. There's also this so-called carbon residue. Look at all these carbons here. Okay, so the carbon residue can actually be converted back to glucose and stored as glycogen in the liver. Alright, so it's not wasted. But the most important part that you need to know is deamination. Okay, the amino group is removed and converted to urea. Got it? Now next we have the liver is also involved in the breakdown of red blood cells. This is only for pure bio. Now very quickly, okay, after being used for a while, I think it's about 3 months, the red blood cells which are worn out will be destroyed in the spleen. The spleen is another part of your body. Now the red blood cells contain hemoglobin. So once it's broken down, the hemoglobin itself is broken down in the liver to bile pigments and iron. Alright, the hemoglobin is broken down, and the iron that you obtain is stored in the liver. It can be reused. Alright, so that's all for breakdown of red blood cells. Important point, iron is stored in the liver. Now finally, let's talk about detoxification. Now detoxification just sounds like detox, right? Which is to remove harmful substances from your body. Now one of the harmful substances that your liver helps you to remove is alcohol. Alcohol, this very harmful substance, is broken down in your liver, and it's broken down to something called acetaldehyde by an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase. Now unfortunately, you need to know the name of this enzyme and the name of what alcohol is broken down to. Right, so commit it to your memory. Alcohol is broken down by alcohol dehydrogenase. Alright, basically hydrogen is taken out and it becomes something called acetaldehyde. 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 Alright, find a way to remember that. Now the liver does have more functions, so read your textbook, those pages that I pointed out, and have a look at what other functions it has. Well, finally, let's end off by talking a bit about alcohol. So look at this scene here. Do you know what's happening? Alright, these are some policemen, and they're actually using a breath analyzer to check if this lady is drink driving. Now you know that drink driving is one of the main causes of road accidents. That's why I always tell you don't drive if you drink, right? So avoid alcohol when you're going to drink. This breath analyzer actually just tests her breath for the concentration of alcohol in her breath. And she can be fined if it's found to be above a certain amount. And what we're interested in this final part of this chapter is what happens when a person consumes excessive alcohol. What happens? Now you can look at this in your textbook, page 107 to 108. Now there are three different things that could happen, right? Alcohol can have harmful effects on the digestive system, on the nervous system, and also social implications or consequences. So let's look at the digestive system first. Now what happens to the digestive system when a person drinks too much alcohol? Firstly, there's an increased risk of gastric ulcers, which you find in the stomach. Okay, the stomach could develop ulcers. And secondly, it may lead to a condition called cirrhosis. This is important, cirrhosis, where your liver cells are destroyed and replaced with a fibrous tissue. And over time, this might lead to liver failure. Now, cirrhosis happens because your liver is kind of overtaxed, right? It's working very, very hard to break down all the alcohol, but it can only work at a certain rate. And if you overwork it, it can lead to cirrhosis. And here's what a liver with cirrhosis looks like. It's very ugly. Basically, it's full of this fibrous scar tissue, right? And this is just right? Now, alcohol can also lead to harmful effects on the nervous system. Over here, you see the unfortunate consequence of alcohol. This guy, his whole face been doodled on. He's clearly drunk. Now, and what does alcohol do to us? Well, it actually causes us, it's a depressant, so it actually causes your brain activity to be a bit slower, and hence, some people, they end up having a reduced self-control. They just do many things without thinking. They're a bit more uninhibited, right? They can just do a lot of random things. And you see a lot of funny videos of drunk people online because of that. Now, more importantly, the effects that alcohol has on the nervous system is what causes accidents in drink driving. Because alcohol, as a depressant, right, it slows down brain activity. It causes you to have slower reaction times. You don't react as fast to things. There's poorer muscular coordination. You don't coordinate your movements as well. And you have blurred vision as well, so you can't really see as clearly. And all of this together leads to you having more difficulty driving and all. Right? Poorer judgment, so you're not able to make the right call when things happen and when events take place. Now finally, we're going to be talking about the social consequences of drinking too much alcohol. So far we talked about the digestive system, right? That's something that happens in the long term, alright? If you drink too much alcohol in the long term, you might get ulcers or get cirrhosis. The effects on your nervous system were short term, right? You get like blurred vision and poorer judgment. Now, social implications is also a long-term effect of alcohol. You see, if you drink too much alcohol in the long term, you may become addicted to alcohol, and this might actually lead to problems with your social behavior. You always hear the stories of drunk fathers or mothers, and they neglect their work, their family, and they exhibit violent behavior. So let me just end off on this note that, you might grow up next time and be tempted to drink alcohol, but this is an important point that, be careful of what this might actually end up doing to you and your family and the people around you. And it's good to know that there are societies out there helping people with alcoholism, like Alcoholics Anonymous. Alright, that's all. Thanks for your time. I'll see you back in class.